الحضور الكريم، نرحب بكم في متحف المستقبل وفي ملتقى دبي للذكاء الاصطناعي. Dear guests, welcome to the Museum of the Future and the Dubai Assembly for Generative AI. الحضور الكريم، ستبدأ الآن جلسة حوارية يشارك فيها السادة أوين ليدون ولاري ليرنر واليكس كوسماس، ويديرها السيد توم إشرود من QuantumBlack McKinsey. A panel session featuring Eoin Leydon, Larry Lerner, and Alex Cosmas, moderated by Tom Isherwood from QuantumBlack McKinsey, is about to start.
Good morning. We are quite excited to be the first panel of the morning, and while you all are having your coffee and waking up, hopefully we can give you something interesting when it comes to GenAI. My name is Tom Isherwood. I'll be the moderator for this panel, and what we're going to talk about a bit on this panel is how the potential of GenAI comes to life in the context of specific sectors. We've done research at QuantumBlack by McKinsey, identifying more than $4 trillion of annual impact that could come from GenAI. But the reality of this is that it only comes when institutions in particular sectors, whether this is banks, airline companies, pharmaceutical companies, or others, are able to actually deploy this in their operations and see improved results. And so what we'll be doing today is actually going in depth in some of these sectors to get really the latest of what does this look like on the front line in terms of adopting and innovating with GenAI. And to do that, we've brought three of our colleagues who lead our sectoral work in QuantumBlack AI by McKinsey, who can actually talk about what our companies in each of these sectors doing to be able to try to get real value out of GenAI. So I'll briefly introduce my colleagues, and then we'll get started with the discussion. If I start at the far end, we have my colleague Eoin. Eoin leads a lot QuantumBlack's work with life sciences and pharmaceutical companies, and actually has an interesting distinction. When we hired him in QuantumBlack about 17 years ago, at McKinsey about 17 years ago, he was the first person in McKinsey with analytics in his job title. Now, by no means the only one today with more than 5,000 of us, but he was the very first one. And so glad to have you here, Eoin. Secondly, we've got Alex. Alex will be talking a bit about the aviation industry and brings not just experience working with our clients on analytics, but also brings experience from a personal side, coming from an academic background as an aerospace engineer and actually also as a pilot. So, welcome, Alex. And then finally, we have Larry, who will be able to give a perspective on what this looks like in banks, having a broad set of experience, including actually leading analytics inside a bank prior to coming and joining us at QuantumBlack. So welcome, guys.
Thank you.
I'll get us started just by asking one kind of, let's say, broad question to set the scene, which is when you think about each of the sectors that you have expertise in, how mature is GenAI? What are we really seeing happening today when you look at leading institutions in these sectors? What are they deploying? What are they experimenting with? Where's the biggest potential? And I'd like to ask Eoin to get us started, and then we'll come down the line.
Fantastic. Thanks. So I think most of us really became aware of GenAI at the end of 2022 with the advent of ChatGPT. But in life sciences, we've actually been using this technology for some time now, particularly in the area of research. So applying the same types of large language models, but actually to patient journeys and to scientific experiments. And that's probably the most mature, where we're seeing most of the actual deployed applications. Over the last 12 months, it's been an incredibly active period. We're seeing the first proof of concepts and actually pilots now really right across the whole value chain within life sciences. From medical writing, so document production, which is really core to what GenAI can do. There's a huge amount of regulatory reports and documentation and medical writing needed in this industry, and really GenAI helps us automate and streamline those processes. Also on knowledge synthesis, so distilling down the vast amounts of data and documentation and research into digestible insights and actually going beyond search functions and really deriving insights from that. So that's very active in both the research and development area. And then also we're seeing co-pilots now. So this is really where I think a really interesting application. This is using more traditional AI, so predictive and optimization analytics, using it within user applications for people, particularly in clinical trials and also sales and marketing, but now adding a GenAI component, so that becomes much more conversational, and the users really get to interact with the data, the underlying data.
Great. Alex, you want to talk a bit about aviation?
Sure. So if we take travel and hospitality as a global sector, we're seeing over the last 12 months, first of all, a 25x growth in venture capital flowing into the sector to disrupt it, really focused on digital and AI. And then the core incumbents, we like to call them, are the suppliers, the online travel agencies, the hotel brands themselves, even cruise lines and car rentals, certainly airlines are experimenting aggressively. You know, this is an industry that invented the operations research field, was a little late to the data science game, but caught up quickly, was well capitalized, and is now pioneering some of the GenAI applications that are customer facing. So we see a ton in the development of offers. You know, travel broadly, there's such a wide fragmented spectrum of offers that any of us as consumers can buy from. And so cracking that problem has become one of the primary focuses for GenAI. How do I interact more quickly, more effectively with the right information to customers? I think we all are desperate for more reliable information from our travel suppliers. And then increasingly, we're going to see a push into operations. How do I leverage GenAI technologies to actually recover operations and what we call irregular operations on a day-to-day basis? But really, we're still in the first inning, to answer your question, Tom. I think for the next year, we will see more POCs, proofs of concept, than we will see productionized AI, largely because it's risky to turn off a customer to a bad experience, to disrupt a high complexity operation. So we will see more proofs of concept. I think there will be very few, and it's generally going to be your top tier online travel agencies, your travel providers, and your airlines that actually productionize one or two.
And Larry, we're going to turn to banking. I'm always interested to see what the banks are doing, because in many technologies, they tend to be the first ones to actually really get moving on them. What are we seeing when it comes to GenAI?
Yeah, thank you. It's been absolutely inspiring to see the way that banks have embraced the technology. I've got the privilege to meet with and see what banks are doing at a global level. And there's literally hundreds of examples of use cases, all the way from front office sales and marketing to operations, middle and back office. Of course, technology and software acceleration is a big one for banks as well. All the way to just core functions, legal compliance, human resources. So there's definitely a lot of experimentation going on. There's a number of front runners that, unlike other industries, are already getting into production. Morgan Stanley famously launched their first GenAI product for the wealth managers, I don't know, like 7 months ago, which means that they had been working on it with OpenAI, for some time before that. So banks have been on the forefront, and it's been really exciting. I think today, where you think about where the actual focus and momentum is, I would say it's in 3 areas. I would say it's in service operations, better enabling customer service, better enabling relationship managers in commercial and business banking, better enabling wealth managers. So any function that has a customer focus, very, very big. The second one is, banks have a lot of legacy architecture, right? 30, 40-year-old servers and mainframes. And so they're finally starting to convert some of that code into newer code, beginning to decommission old systems and beginning to accelerate the way that they're doing software development. So that's getting a ton of traction. And then the third one is virtual virtual agents, to really provide concision in terms of the knowledge that the bank has, whether it's legal and compliance, whether it's from a customer understanding perspective. These virtual agents are definitely getting good momentum. What I'm personally most excited about, though, is that I'm starting to see the content and document generation really take hold in some institutions, whether they're for creating RFP responses, whether they're creating regulatory filings for model documentation, whether it's providing, first draft of, blue books or research reports. So we're beginning to see a lot of experimentation in the actual creation of content, which should actually, give many institutions a big boost. Very exciting.
It's exciting also to hear there's some areas of commonality across these industries. This will have a big potential when it comes to really changing how we interact with customers across all of these, but also then some very unique applications, kind of industry by industry. Maybe, Eoin, you mentioned some really interesting things I thought about, whether it was around clinical trials or around R&D, or how are these things going to actually drive real impact for these companies? When are we going to start to see this reflecting in results?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely critical we focus on what kind of impact we're going after. It's an interesting technology, but we need to think, why are we doing it, and what benefits you can get from it. I'd say primarily within life sciences, it's around improving patient care and outcomes. And so applications around understanding patient journeys and some of the biological and chemical chemistry applications. And actually, I think that's an interesting point I like to focus on a lot, which is large language models. I think most people see them applied to a human language, but actually you can apply them similarly to the language of biology and chemistry. And that's a really interesting research area. And in life sciences, that plays through to that patient benefit. I think secondly, an innovation, so new drug discovery and finding applications for existing molecules. That's really driving an explosion of innovation. And I think over the next 2 or 3 years, that will be really exciting and exponential growth in the number of products that are brought to market. And then I'd also mention economic benefit. So efficiencies through process automation, through document writing, and through automating workflows, and also growth opportunities. Because you're increasing the funnel of molecules you can come and develop, that actually is a large growth opportunity. In terms of impact, I'd say we're really just at the beginning of this. Alex mentioned that we're seeing a lot of pilots and proof of concepts. That's absolutely right, I think, across industries. So it's great we're now seeing some of these applied in practice, and there are early benefits coming through. I'd say over the next 12 months, in the short term, I'd expect to see efficiency primarily as the first wave of impact, and then more in terms of the innovation, growth, and patient impact in the longer term.
Alex, actually, I'd love to hear a bit about this from you. When am I, I book a lot of travel. When am I going to have a GenAI agent that solves all these problems for me?
So to some degree, you already do. Who's interacted with a chatbot? Not AI-fueled, but chatbot in general when you're online travel servicing. So it's about half the room. So what's happening is a lot of the logic that is behind the scenes of a chatbot, which was hard-coded business rules around if this, then that, and then sort of the classic natural language processing behind it, is being replaced, or Gen AI is being injected in. So these are sort of, you may not notice the difference aside from getting a better answer, hopefully. And then increasingly, I think where you're really going to notice the difference is where the actions themselves are tied via microservices and an API push to actually go drive the request. So it's not an agent just telling you what the best answer is, and here's how you can, the sort of the 101 response, but it's actually, we will service it the way that a human, the reason we all prefer to talk to humans. And I think that we are likely to see that push heavily over the next 12 months. It's not, it won't be all of our suppliers, but for the most part, most of the chatbot services are already third party. So as a big travel supplier, your favorite airline, hotel group, doesn't need to develop a lot of that capability in-house. They have to develop the logic, of course, and the business rules. but you're already plugging into a third-party agent that's investing aggressively in maturing the tech. So I think it's certainly within the next couple of years.
Larry, I want to turn to a bit of a different topic, which is data. And I know that obviously data can be a challenge to deploy GenAI. GenAI might also be a solution for some of those challenges. What are you seeing in this space?
It's exciting. When I look at the work that we're doing across banking and insurance, some of the most interesting data work is where we're taking reports and data that previously haven't really been leveraged, structured and unstructured, and being able to ingest them to get significantly higher levels of productivity out of the employees and out of the data. So I would say GenAI is providing a really good on-ramp to getting to insights and to getting to information that previously it would have been very difficult and very manual to get to. I do a lot of work in insurance, and so think, for example, on an insurance policy that would have been written 30 years ago, for the person that is being covered, that's likely sitting on some microfiche or some PDF on some policy admin system, that if you are either doing some claims work on it, you probably will need to manually look at that policy. It isn't being captured electronically anywhere, hasn't been digitized. What we're seeing with GenAI is the ability to ingest those policies, be able to read them, and be able to compare across them. So that kind of dark data, as we sometimes call it, is becoming more accessible. So that's one thing that's exciting. The other thing that's exciting for those of you that sort of have grown up in analytics is the ability to generate new data or synthetic data to help train your models. Oftentimes, when you're doing some esoteric modeling on some very specific segment or on some very specific asset class, sometimes it's hard to just find enough data to train your models. And so what we're seeing a lot of institutions do with GenAI is actually use it as a way to accelerate and train the modeling through the creation of data for the purpose of training the models and fine-tuning them. So we're seeing this as an enabler. It should make your life as a banker easier. It doesn't mean that you don't have to have good governance. It doesn't mean that you don't have to have good quality, but what it does mean is that you can access more of it and then use the technology to help accelerate the path, to getting good label data.
Thanks, Larry. Alex, you mentioned the opportunity when it comes to chatbots, to virtual agents. I want to ask you a bit about automation. How much is this going to allow us to fully automate things versus where do we need to make sure we always have kind of a human in the loop?
So it certainly depends on the function. There are certain functions within the travel ribbon that, and transportation broadly, that you wouldn't necessarily want, you wouldn't want to remove the human from the loop because there are highly dimensional problems, things like network planning, things like your fleet strategy. You can ask a question historically, the answer you get back will be largely based on the dimensions that you train against. So, but the majority of functions in, let's say, tech ops or maintenance or all things customer service, customer experience, product design, marketing, corporate communications, back office functions like finance, automation will be widespread. I think for the most part, the promise of GenAI, at least that I see, is being able to take, actually action hypersegmentation that we've talked about for years in the consumer sectors, to be able to treat everybody like the segment of one that we are. The challenge has always been, how do I build models that are trained against the individual history of a customer, build propensity models and preference models for individual customers, and then can deliver that offer, the suggestion, the preference at an individual customer level. Those are all three very difficult problems. GenAI is helping to crack into at least the first two. And I think the delivery mechanism, to me, continues to be one of the harder things for the travel agency to crack. And I often like to tell my clients, if you can't action it at a segment of one level, don't bother creating the model for it, because you're going to create a whole bunch of work around data, a whole bunch of work, all of your customer data platform, your CRM is a huge investment of time and money. You may be able to get down to individual propensities, but if I can't actually go deliver against your individual willingness to pay, don't bother making that investment. I'd rather you experiment on something that is, a microscopic or mesoscopic segmentation rather than a hyper segmentation. That's just one example. But in general, automation is the only way that we will get to that scale of test and learn. Because you can't expect the data science team that's going to go run an A/B test, wait 3 days for the results, come back and say, okay, should we make a slight change? It's going to be happening at such scale and speed that we're going to require automation.
Great. Eoin, I want to shift gears and actually talk a bit about some of the challenges. I mean, I think it's always important to keep that in mind, despite the excitement. And I could imagine those challenges, especially kind of ethical issues, being especially large when it comes to life sciences. How do you see your clients thinking about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Every new technology opens up new opportunities, but it also opens up new risks, and we need to really proactively think about how to manage them. There's probably 5 or 6 risks that I think are particularly acute in life sciences, but actually probably generally also appear in other industries. I always start with accountability. I think that's the number one thing. Analytics and data is a decision support function, but the people who make those decisions are humans. So the accountability rests with the people who are, so in life sciences, the people who are developing and marketing medications, the people who are making decisions around that, so the physician and patients who are making those decisions, and with regulators that are overseeing that. And analytics is going to play a part in that, but it doesn't take away accountability from those institutions and people. And the way you actually implement that is through a variety of different things. So in some cases, you have to have a human in the loop, and it's a decision support system. In other places, when you're fully automating a process, it's really critical about how you think about model validation, both when you're doing the build, but then ongoing as well, because those decisions keep on propagating. I'd say that's a fundamental piece we all need to keep in mind, and if we get that wrong, I think there's going to be a lot of negative consequences. Some of the other important ones are, I mentioned bias as well. So if you think about what analytics really is, it's using a lot of data that is being created in the past or near past, and then propagating that into decisions that are made now and in the future. And any biases in that historical data, there's a risk you just play that through. So old ways of working and old selection bias in how you collected that data can propagate. So that is a risk. I think analytics also provides the tools to overcome that, because if you proactively look for what bias is in that data, you can correct for it. But you do have to look for it, and you do have to correct for it. So it has to be a very active process. I'd say accuracy. I think GenAI in particular, we've all heard about hallucinations, and we see if we ask ChatGPT a question, it always tries to answer. It's always leaning forward in the answer. So what we've learned over the last 12 months of implementing it is the models themselves might be 5 or 10% of the work to get them working. 90% of the work is on the post-processing, on the triangulation, on the accuracy checks, on the compliance checks in healthcare as well, so that what you're saying is actually compliant and evidence-based. And that requires much more work than the models themselves. And so we're going to have to keep on focusing on that. Other ones that are generally available whenever we're using data, so privacy, particularly acute in healthcare because it's quite sensitive data. It's also private data, and security for how that data is handled. And then I'd say there's one other one when we're thinking about how to handle this. I'd say it's transparency, because we need to be super transparent on what we're doing at all stages, and that is transparency with patients, transparent with physicians around what's behind this, transparent with regulators, and then with organizations that we're working on. They need to be transparent with their employees. Is it going to be replacing some of their work? Is it changing some of their work? People are very nervous about this, so being on the front foot and communicating that, and similarly externally with investors and other stakeholders.
Thank you. Larry, I want to shift gears to one of the other challenges, which is scaling. You know, we hear a lot in the analytics world about this pilot purgatory. What is it going to take to scale GenAI solutions?
Yeah, so that was a great answer, Owen, and I would delete life sciences, insert banking, and it's going to be very similar. And it's a similar topics for scaling. What we're seeing in the banking space, I would say maybe a few additional points related to what Owen said. I do agree with the scaffolding that's required to get these solutions up to scale. POCs are relatively easy. Getting them into production in a bank is pretty hard, namely because of the complexity of the workflows that they have to be integrated with. And the fact that you have such varying architectures in financial institutions where, that have to sort of talk to each other, right? If you have a blank sheet of paper and you're dealing with all new technology, it's one thing, but in most institutions, you have, very, very differing levels of technology in the environments where oftentimes your production environments may not even understand some of the code that you're trying to write in the development environments or in the testing environments. So having sort of that right scaffolding, I think it's going to be important, particularly when you are dealing with foundation models and large language models and all the post-processing that has to happen. So there's a lot of technical challenges for sure, which Owen went into for scaling. So I'm going to turn more to the human aspect. What we are finding is that and we did this research with AI, but we're finding very similar trends with GenAI. Something like 62 to 65% of companies stall at some point. Only 10% of AI models ever make it to production. I mean, we have these very dismal, statistics about failure. And when you sort of peel the onion and you try to find the root cause of that failure, it's typically not technical. It's typically not because you couldn't get the right model, you couldn't get the right data, you couldn't get the right technology. Eventually, companies get there. It's typically human. You can't get adoption. You develop this great relationship manager tool, but you can't get the relationship managers to actually use it appropriately. You get through the through the 8th or the 9th mile, but you can't get information to your customers in the last mile. So getting the right operating model to actually enable insights to be utilized becomes a challenge, and it sounds pedantic when I say it, but it's shocking sometimes, to recognize how much of the scaling issue becomes also the human issue. So I think that banks over time are going to just have to be forced to be a lot more agile in the way that they approach new technologies, in the way that they approach new opportunities, so that they can not only solve the technical challenges of legacy architecture, but they can also solve the human challenges of actually getting these things scaled up into production and getting them, more into the front office and more into the hands of the customers.
Thanks a lot, Larry. Look, I think when taking this all together, there's a lot of exciting opportunities. There's important challenges to address across all of these industries. And taking this all, 2023 really feels like kind of the breakout year for GenAI. What are we going to see in 2024 and 2025? And I'd love to just hear actually briefly from each of you, and then this will be how we wrap up the panel. Maybe, Owen, you want to get us started?
I think you put it very well. 2023 really has been a breakthrough year. It's really reached the public consciousness around AI. And I would say it's AI, not just GenAI. I think we're going to increasingly see that actually it's a lot of the things we saw as more traditional and now core machine learning, so predictive and optimization analytics, plus what GenAI is bringing around synthesis and generation. I think that is an incredibly powerful tool set. 2023, I think we proved the technology works. We can apply it to multiple different situations, and we can apply it in proof of concepts. But we're really only in the shallows now. I think we're entering one of the most innovative periods of our time. And the next 12 months, we're going to see actually playing through this promise into real applications and real impact flowing through from that. And I would also see us moving from the probably more conservative applications to actually being confident that we're able to implement these in a more safe environment. And actually, Larry's point on scale, I think, is absolutely critical, because these can't remain in individual pilots. This really needs to scale up, and then you get the multiplier effect of these different technologies come together.
Thanks, Eoin. Alex?
Look, I think in the consumer sectors, we're likely to see, travel, hospitality, in some ways, compete with the innovation from the other consumer sectors like telecom and retail banking for the hearts and minds of consumers. So this technology, in large part, will be shared across, and in some respects will competed for share of mind, share of wallet. There will be mistakes. I think we will see in the next couple of years, and some of them may be prominent mistakes that get coverage and buzz, but that's okay. We need to make. I'd certainly hate to be the one making the mistake, but I do think we learn more from them than the tiny micro successes that most of us don't notice. So I think we'll see a couple of prominent advancements in the next year.
Great. Larry?
It's exciting. I think in banking we're going to continue to see this amazing forward momentum. Our latest research would suggest that globally banks are going to see something like $300 to $400 billion in benefits just from GenAI. So I think you're going to continue to see heavy focus, heavy investment. At the same time, though, the risk and regulatory environment, it's going to have to shift a little bit. And so we're all expecting, new controls and new guardrails that are going to have to be set up for banks and for other industries. And that might temper, the growth a bit, but we're seeing massive uptake in both large and small institutions. I was on a client meeting last week with a credit union, which, for those of you that are not aware, it's a very small sort of local bank, and they're applying GenAI. So the barrier to entry for GenAI is so low, that it's going to provide access to just about every size of institution. And so we're excited to continue to see the momentum. I think we're going to start to see a lot more customer interaction capabilities. Most banks have been very careful not to actually touch customers with GenAI because of the risks of hallucinations and toxicity. But I think that there's been enough innovation done in post-processing where you're going to see a number of front-runner institutions not only use it to drive significant savings and significant efficiencies, but also start to drive some revenue growth through hyper-personalization, through execution, next best offers and things like that. So we're excited, and I certainly am happy to be, seeing it, from the vantage point that we get to see it.
Thanks a lot, Larry. I think there's a lot exciting to come over the next couple of years. Thank you, Eoin, Alex, Larry, for making the trip from the US, from Europe, and sharing some of the insights really from what's happening on the front lines as companies try to deploy this new technology. And thank you also, everybody else, for making it to the morning panel. I know it's always a bit early to get up and out, but I appreciate you guys being here, and thank you very much.
Thank you.